Gaming just hits differently when it's vertical. There's something about a console that you hold a bit like a walkie-talkie, as if you're waiting for Nintendo to call. Given that the original Game Boy was a vertical device, it's always surprised me that most of the handhelds out there are fairly generic, lozenge-shaped clones of one another. I mean, look, if a Retroid Pocket 6, an Odin 3, and a Conker Pocket Fit walked into a bar, they could all use the same ID. And the barman would have to ask, okay, which one of you is the actual Switch? Now, I'm pretty bad when it comes to buying gaming devices. This isn't a modern phenomenon by any stretch of the imagination. It goes all the way back to my college days. I had an original GBA, and I wasn't going to buy the Game Boy Advance SP, but then I folded. So the fact that I already had an Anbernic 477M on the way didn't stop me from picking up the 477V with my own money. What's worse, they both arrived on the same day, and I wasn't sure which one I should look at first. The fact is, the 477V intrigued me more. This is one of the only consoles of this type on the market, and people might talk about the Ioneo Pocket DMG, the Pocket Vert, or the Retroid Pocket Classic, but none of them quite match the 4:3 aspect ratio of most retro games. Don't get me wrong, they're all fantastic devices, but if you've got, say, a Retroid Pocket Classic, then you're technically 13% more square. So I started with the 477M thinking that I'd get it out of the way, but it really surprised me, not because of what it could do, but because of how often I wanted to pick it up instead of more powerful devices. And the idea of taking those same ingredients and putting them into a vertical form factor really intrigued me. Even so, it's a bit of a conundrum. It's a device that's $200. Is it worth it when more powerful options exist around the same price point, even if they are the same shape as one of Dr. Mario's medicine capsules? I went for the 8GB 477V. For 4:3 retro content, you simply do not need 12GB of RAM, and I've had a fantastic time with this. I've been running every PS2 and GameCube game that I wanted to, loading up HD texture packs, and the device hasn't so much as raised an eyebrow. Perhaps I'd notice this if I was pushing Switch and PC emulation hard. But on the games that this device is built for, everything seems to run like a charm. But I have to say, I wasn't quite prepared for how big this device would be. Now, look, over time, I've got used to it. It sits in my hands. I'm quite happy with it. I suppose I'm just used to vertical handhelds that are an awful lot smaller. Playing with the TrimUI brick makes you feel like a giant. But with the 477V, I feel like I'm a child again. I mean, look, adulthood is just childhood. It's just got worse graphics and more back pain. I swear nothing humbles you more than needing a magnifying glass to read a game menu. But it isn't all sweetness and light. There are aspects of this device that really I'm not keen on, and things that anybody looking to buy should know before they commit. And that means we have to take a proper look at the Anbernic 477V. Let's ask if our inner child has a better taste in games than our outer adult. Will we find that joy has a form factor? Or is the R77V just another tall tale? Or does it rise above the competition? Like I said in the introduction, the first thing you notice about the device is how big it is, because if you look at all of the images and videos, they don't quite do it justice. This is the Andre the Giant of vertical handhelds, but that size doesn't automatically translate into weight. At around 334 grams, it may be heavier than the Pocket DMG, but it is substantially lighter than the AYN Thor or Odin 3, and that means that despite its size, it still fits quite comfortably in your hands and feels quite well balanced. Although some people swear that you need a grip with this, I can only assume they are giants. Like the 477M, this device has a MediaTek Dimensity 8300 processor, 8GB of LPDDR5 RAM, and an internal storage of 128GB. There is a 12 gig version available as well. We have that stunning 4.7-inch LTPS display with 1280 by 960 resolution and a 4:3 aspect ratio, a 5,300 mAh battery with a USB-C charging and support for 27-watt fast charging, giving you between 3 to 8 hours of gameplay, depending on what you're playing, and a charging time of around about 90 minutes. You've got Wi-Fi 6E and Bluetooth 5.3. It handles micro SD cards with up to 2 terabytes, and it's running Android 14 with Anbernic's own RG launcher. The software here, and I've mentioned this before, is rubbish. So I'm going to be talking about Gamma OS in the very near future, but I'll leave that for another video. New users can use my Anbernic setup guide to get started as quickly as possible if they want, and more advanced users will probably want to put their own front ends on here and replace many of the emulators. In fact, they're probably going to want to install something like Gamma OS. Audio-wise, you've got downward-facing speakers, which isn't a yoga pose, by the way, and they're fine. They do quite lack a bit of bass, and they've got poor stereo separation. For the best audio, though, you can use the included headphone jack. The device comes in 2 colours. I've got the black version here, but it's also available in a retro colourway. And since owning this thing, I've gone backwards and forwards on whether I should have chosen the other colourway or not. They both look great. Now, I want to say that the build quality here is excellent. There isn't any cracking or flexing, and if you pick this up and shake it, you only get a sound like a rattlesnake trapped between 2 cushions. It's there, but it is barely perceptible, and it's from the back buttons as well. And you can be sure with build quality like this, it's not going to bite you in the asp. That said, there are some issues, and that mostly comes down to having this all-glass front. I have seen pictures posted of devices that have been dropped or knocked, and the front has smashed. This doesn't seem to be a design flaw so much as, I don't know, maybe something to do with the form factor perhaps. Now, I'm not really somebody who likes using grips. And this is already a chunky device to begin with, but it does seem like the rubber protective cases that you can buy for this unit may actually be a good idea in this instance. In fact, it's a bit disappointing that whilst Anbernic sends over a TPU case with the 477M, they don't with the 477V. Another thing to note is that this device has a flat back with a shelf on it where you put your fingers. This mirrors devices like the TrimUI Brick and 35XX Pro, just on a much bigger scale. Previous devices like the 405V and 406V had these ergonomic bumps that were a bit like they'd stapled 2 sausage rolls to the back of your console. As a design evolution, it seems to be one of those mutations that have stuck. A design mutation that I'd like to see succumb to natural selection, however, is what they've done with the D-pad. Now, don't get me wrong. This is actually a really nice D-pad. It's flat, smooth design. It's different from those on the other recent Anbernic devices, and it's got no directional markings. It works well, it's responsive, and it easily passes the Kirby pancake test, which ironically I actually did on Shrove Tuesday for this console. The problem is, this is not the D-pad you've been looking for. On the 476H and 477M, they've got this beautiful D-pad. It's one of the features of the device that I like the most. This one is fine, but the old ones were special, and I've got no idea why they thought that changing it would be a good idea. If you haven't used the old D-pads, then you're not going to think that this is a problem. It's perfectly fine. But if you have, your thumb is going to notice. Now, I like the face buttons here. They're membrane, but they have a really nice sort of click to them, which then ends in a soft, springy quality, making them satisfying to press even when you're not playing anything. You've got Hall effect analog sticks, and I like them. They're smooth, they're responsive, and they've got a nice amount of travel. They do have quite large dead zones, though, if you test it in laboratory conditions, and the sensitivity does ramp up very quickly to full range once you get past that dead zone. But in everyday use, I haven't found this to be much of a problem. It's just worth being aware of if stick precision matters to you. But these have another trick up their stick. Because the vertical form factor, these sticks can actually be positioned slightly diagonally in from the D-pad and face buttons, and that gives you much more of a traditional PS2 vibe. I found my thumbs comfortably settling into place whilst playing, with the only slight problem being how far your fingers have to reach to hit the triggers. It is not a problem, at least for me, but I'm sure that it will be for some. And if anything actually lets this device down in terms of controls, it is those triggers. Every time I click on them, I find, well, they sound just a little bit too hollow, just a bit less premium than I would expect for a $200 price point. They do have a benefit over the 477M, but it is purely psychological. With the 477M being a horizontal unit, the digital triggers kind of felt wrong, being in line and all. My hands expected stacked analog input there because of the form factor. It kind of suggests that that's what you should get. On the 477V, that expectation simply isn't there. You're holding something shaped like a Game Boy, and your brain kind of adjusts to its standards accordingly. Although my brain adjusting to those standards is what made me buy this in the first place. So whilst this does affect those games that rely on analog trigger input, particularly racing titles, it doesn't feel as big a deal as it did on the 477M. But if I'm honest, the controls are fine. They're nothing to write home about, but they're fine. The real star of the show is the screen. Now, I've waxed lyrical about this screen before, and just so you know, if you don't like having a waxy lyrical, you can clean it off with some white spirit. This 4.7-inch 4x3 display gives you the same real estate as if you were playing a 4x3 game on a 5.7-inch 16:9 display. And you can feel it. When you load up a PS2 title and it fills the entire display edge to edge, there's this sense of scale that you simply don't get on wider screens, where half the real estate is occupied by black bars doing absolutely nothing to justify their existence. I think that's really why I like these devices and why it's been so popular, because there just isn't anything else quite like them on the market that plays your 4x3 content just nice and big without any pillar boxing. The screen has a refresh rate of 120Hz, which means that you can run black frame insertion or CRT beam shaders. The result is retro games that look close to how they appeared on original CRT televisions, and the brightness and saturation are brilliant. Okay, no, it's not OLED, but it's pretty damn close. You've got rich blacks, you've got deep, vibrant colours, and everything looks sharp and clean. Some people have actually said that their OLED devices are now sat gathering dust because they've got this. And if you've got a dusty OLED, well, that's what you need the lyrical wax for. It's also great if you're playing this late at night. Not only does the screen dim enough so that it's comfortable to play in a dark room, you've also got this thing called night mode, which shifts the screen to a warm yellow tint. Basically, you're removing the blue light from the device, and that blue light is the light that keeps you awake for quite a while after you finish playing. So, unlike a full-size tuba, this is brilliant for playing in bed. It does have one problem, but I wouldn't have noticed this unless somebody had told me about it. Now they have told me, I can't unsee it. But I have to thank turn-based Toddy for letting me know about this. The screen on this and on the 477M isn't talking to the stock Android operating system properly, and it thinks that it's 60Hz, when in reality it's 120. That means that VSync doesn't work properly, and that causes this stutter when you're scrolling in 2D games. Now, there is a fix for that, and that's to use Gamma OS, which sorts all of this out and gives you the option to switch refresh rates. The reality is, I can still barely notice it, and it hasn't spoiled my enjoyment at all. And part of that is because of the raw power that you've got in this Dimensity 8300. It's a significant step up from the Unisoc T820 found in the 476H. And that translates to PS2 and GameCube running properly without any hacky workarounds, for the most part. Basically, you load up a game, you set it to 2x resolution, and it just works with a few bits of twiddling between Vulkan and OpenGL here and there. On the odd problem games, switching to 1x resolution tends to solve that. But some games will even play at 4x resolution, which actually absolutely astounds me. Anything from the Atari 2600 all the way through to the PS2 and GameCube will run like a dream. You can use CRT shaders, black frame insertion, and run ahead simultaneously on retro systems and have processing headroom to spare. PS1 and N64 games can be upscaled to 960p or higher, and they look stunning on this display. Dreamcast runs beautifully at 2x resolution with room for shaders on top. Sega Saturn, which is notoriously difficult to emulate, actually runs here well too, although you'll want to turn off beam simulation for that one. I wouldn't advise emulating any title which is 16:9, which means Vita, PSP, anything in the Wii catalogue that doesn't have a 4x3 option, and anything above Wii U is pretty much out. It's playable if you really want to, but it's an experience so compromised you'd expect to find it in a Pizza Express in Woking. The sweet spot here is PlayStation 2 and GameCube. I've carried over my Kingdom Hearts save with the HD texture pack that I was using, and I've got Ico running as here with a lovely new texture pack that I'll put a link to in the description below. Metroid Prime, Double Dash, and a plethora of other games have been superb. And if you're using PAL region ROMs, you get that extra 17% performance boost as well. So knowing all of this, is it actually worth your money? Well, for me, I would definitely say yes. There is a distinct psychological impact of the form factor, something that reminds you of games gone by. The screen, the chip, the form factor creates something that is greater than the sum of its parts. And I now want to reach for this one over the 477M because it just feels a bit different to playing on something like the Thor or the Odin 3. You can forgive it the lack of analog triggers, for example, because the form factor just changes the game that little bit. Most people are going to be able to get away with the 8GB model as well. It's perfectly capable of playing what you want. And if you're somebody who plays retro games from that 4x3 era and wants a vertical form factor for it, then I think this is the best thing on the market. Even things like the Retro Pocket Classic can't really hold a candle up to this device, because not only is the aspect ratio different, it doesn't play as many games. All of the Anbernic devices with this particular screen have been pretty special in one way or another. And whilst this probably isn't the ultimate version, its final form, this really does give 4x3 retro gaming something special. That's what I think anyway, and I would love to know what you think in the comments below. Which one of these Anbernic devices would you get, or have you got? Or do you think that raw power is more important and you'd rather choose something like the Odin 3 or AYN Thor? Are you worried about the all-glass front, or worried about the plastic back, or just worried that if you pick one of these things up, you'd never be able to put it down again? Whilst you're down leaving a comment, why not leave a like as well? And of course, hit that subscribe button. And I want to thank you ever so much for watching, and I hope that you've enjoyed it. I'll be back with another foray into the retro gaming world ever so soon. Why not join me then if you can? And until then, happy gaming.